Hello. We're going to look at another argument by Ali Martinez R1, and it's another variation of the ontological argument. So we're going to take the entire argument and we're going to parse it into modal predicate logic to determine whether it's logically valid. So this is the actual treat itself of the argument, and as always I recommend that everyone jump onto Twitter and follow Ali Martinez R1 just because he posts just brilliant philosophy, theology, logic. So he's my teacher basically. So we're going to jump straight into examining the argument. So it's regarding ontological reality. So let's jump straight in. Point 1. Ontological reality. Either things exist through themselves or through another. Point 2. If everything existed through another, nothing would have come to exist. 3. Something came to exist. 4. Then there must be something that exists through itself. There you go. 5. What exists through itself must have always existed and cannot fail to exist. 6. Therefore, what must have always existed and cannot fail to exist is the greatest conceivable being. 7. The greatest conceivable being is what theism understands God to be. So, the first thing I do when turning an argument into logic is to identify the variables. Our variables in this circumstance are O for ontological reality, T for exist through themselves, A exist through another, I exist through itself, G, which is GCB or greatest conceivable being, J for God, and S for exist. Now I could have chosen G for God, but I'd already chosen GCB for God. So for God, I went with J, obviously because J comes from Jehovah, which is God's name. So we jump onto the first proposition, which is ontological reality. Either things exist through themselves or through another. So what I did was taking the variables of ontological reality, exist through themselves or exist through another, which is O, T and A. I'm using a modal operator if necessary, because the argument is only valid if God is necessary, because if God is contingent, if God is dependent on something else, if God is possibly, then God is not God, because being necessary is one of the fundamental qualities of God being God. So it's necessary that for all x, where x is O for the ontological reality, x is either T, exist for themselves, or x is A, exist for another. So it's pretty straightforward to turn the argument into logic. Number 2. If everything existed through another, nothing would have come to exist. So again, we're dealing with necessary because we're dealing with God. So it's necessary that for all x, if x has the property of A, which is exists through another, then yes, x does not exist. So we're dealing with the negation of God, or it couldn't come to exist. Then we jump on to number 3. Number 3 is straightforward. Something came to exist. So it's necessary for all x, x has the property of s. It exists, it came to exist. That's the easiest one to do. And then we jump down to number 4, which is S and T. Okay. Then there must be something that exists through itself. So it's necessary for all x. If x has the property of s, sorry, then x has the property of t, which is exists through itself. And then number 5, which is almost like an inverse, it's saying what exists through itself must have always existed and cannot fail to exist. So it's necessary that for all x, if x is t, then x has the property of s, which is if x exists for themselves, then x exists. Okay. And then we come to number 6. Therefore, what must have always existed and cannot fail to exist is the greatest conceivable thing. So we're saying, okay, therefore, which is this sum here, it is necessary that for all x, where x is the GCB, greatest conceivable thing, then x has a property of s existing and a property of not existing, which is it cannot fail to exist, so it cannot not exist, which probably does sound a bit confusing, but if s in isolation would be exists, not s would be does not exist, so not s means it does not exists, which means it exists. Yep. I'm probably making it sound more confusing than it needs to be. But that's the gist of it. Not exists means that it does exist. Number 7, the greatest conceivable being is what theism understands God to be. Now, I don't think this is just part of the argument. It's not the conclusion. I think this is number 6 is the conclusion. I think this is more like just a statement in isolation. So we take all our propositions and we build it into this formula here. So what we see here, this is the entire argument passed into a modal predicate logic formula. Oh, I think it's beautiful. Oh, love it. Logic. Great. So that we've got our formula. What we do is examine whether it's a well-formed formula at WFF. So first line, necessary for all x, if x is O, then x is T or A. That's a well-formed formula. It's pretty standard modal predicate logic. Same for the second one, necessary for all x. If x is A, then x is not S. Again, it's a well-formed formula. It's standard modal predicate logic. Third one, necessary for all x, Sx, and this is like the simplest one. Again, it's a well-formed formula. The next, necessary for all x, if s is x, then x is t. And again, it's the most bog standard kind of modal predicate logic. Finally, next, necessary for all x, if x is t, then x is s. And again, it's a well-formed formula. And again, it does look like s implies t and t implies x. It's probably the nearest thing I could get from turning these into arguments. If something exists for itself, if it exists for itself, it's always existed and cannot fail to exist. There you go. And conclusion, therefore it's necessary for all x, if x is g, then x is s and not s. So these are all well-formed formulas, which means that this argument, in my opinion, is logically valid. It's pretty standard logic. And again, what I did next was just to get a second opinion, just threw the whole thing into ChatGPT. The ChatGPT is brilliant at breaking down logic, so I fed it in with the variables and then the actual modal predicate logical formula. ChatGPT reverse engineers the entire thing, and it analysed and it parsed them, and the conclusion is from premises 1, 2, 3 and 4, it follows that if something is a GCB, then it exists through itself and hence it exists. So the conclusion seems to be logically valid based on the premises provided. So even according to ChatGPT, it's logically valid. So therefore, yep, good job, Ali Martinez 51. It's a perfectly logically valid argument. So there you go. Well done. I love it.